It is 1971. We've just witnessed Led Zeppelin exploding onto the scene and dominating the hard rock world in 1969, only to see Black Sabbath return the favor and come in 1970 and dominate the heavy metal scene. And now, the two biggest bands in the world are about to put out two of their greatest albums. This is a clash of titans. Will one of them pick up the gold and leave the other empty-handed? Well, before we get too confident, three other bands also, three of the most legendary bands in rock, are also putting out what I think are their seminal albums. 5 bands, 5 trademark albums going head to head. This is the toughest year to judge ever. So who's going to pick up the gold? Stay tuned and find out next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of Fixing the Grammys. This year we're in the year 1971, and boy do we have a stellar year to look through. As we teased in the opener, Black Sabbath comes in as the defending champions, after knocking out the previous champions, Led Zeppelin. Well, let's just say Led Zeppelin has taken this challenge, accepted it, and is coming back with a vengeance. Because in this year, both Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin are going to put out fantastic, seminal albums in their collections. But wait, there's more. We also have 3 other hard rock bands that are going to produce their greatest albums in the same year. 5 tremendous bands going head to head for the best hard rock heavy metal performance of the year. Now, before we get to those 5 bands, this is the time to subscribe to the channel, to give it a thumbs up. We put out new content as we go in and we fix the Grammys every year. This year we're fixing 1971. Next week it'll be 1972. You get the drift. You want to be informed. You don't want to miss this. So subscribe to my channel and you'll be informed of all the content every time we do another video. So subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Let's go to the list. First off, newcomer of the year. Now, last year, in the year 1970, Black Sabbath was our newcomer of the year, one of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time. In 1969, Led Zeppelin was our newcomer of the year, greatest hard rock band of all time. In 1967, Jimi Hendrix was our newcomer of the year, best guitarist of all time. Now, in 1971, we don't have anybody of that kind of stature, but we do have some very interesting hard rock heavy metal bands that came onto the scene. And the band we're going to pick today is the band Budgie. Budgie is one of those underground bands loved by many that never really broke big into the music industry, but influenced the music industry in a big way. Their most interesting influence was on one of the greatest heavy metal bands of all time, Metallica. Metallica has covered several Budgie songs, including Bread Fan. They were obviously big fans of Budgie. Now, I have to say, I'm in that camp of, I'm not a big fan of Budgie. Yes, they're heavy. Yes, they were before their time. Yes, they were influential. But I've never been quite able to get past the singer. Just not a kind of vocal style that I really like. Kind of high and nasally. I don't really like it. But their influence is what I'm going to give them the credit for here. Because again, if you take some of these budgie songs and you put them in the hands of somebody like Metallica, you're going to see just how brilliant these songs are. Now, the Grammys that year, for their best debut, they went with Carly Simon. Now, I think this is a little bit of an uninspired choice on the big scene as well, but I'm going to go with the Grammys on this one. I think Carly Simon's impact in the overall music category, it'd be hard to put budgie into the big category with their limited appeal. So budgie wins Best Hard Rock Heavy Metal Debut. Carly Simon wins it in the overall category for Best Newcomer. Now let's go to instrumentals. Our 5 nominees for Best Hard Rock or Heavy Metal Instrumental Performance begins with the Allman Brothers and their song Whipping Post. This is the live version of Whipping Post. Now, many of you may be surprised at my inclusion of the Allman Brothers, but remember, we are still in largely a proto-metal type of environment where there's a lot of great music that's happening that's going to influence the upcoming era of heavy metal. And the Allman Brothers have one of the most distinct influences of anybody, because right here, the Allman Brothers make a very interesting decision. They take the songs that they have put out on the studio and put them into a double live album. Now, I'm not sure that this is the first double live album, but it's definitely the first double live album that has this kind of an impact. And the other thing they do here is not only are they kind of the creators of the double live album, but they're also the extended jam versions of their songs become a staple. So you take a song like Whipping Post, which I almost nominated back a couple of years ago for the studio version, but realize that when there's another version of the song, perhaps performed live, that's the song that we probably should include. And so instead of nominating the studio, we're going with the live version of this. These are going to be hugely influential in heavy metal. If you think about Southern hard rock, one of its staples was the extended guitar solo. We are seeing a lot of crunchy riffs by Tony Iommi. We're seeing some really fast stuff going on by Deep Purple. But it's really the Southern hard rock bands that really take the guitar solo and that epic, long drawn-out solo into a new category. So the Allman Brothers, not only is this an excellent song, but it's a very influential song in a number of different ways for the future of heavy metal. So our nominee number 1, Whipping Post, the live version from Allman Brothers. Our second nominee is one of my favorite Black Sabbath songs of all time, Children of the Grave. The beginning of this song has one of my favorite Tony Iommi riffs of all time. Now, we spoke about this last week. Trying to pick your favorite Tony Iommi riff is not easy to do, as he is the master and the owner of many historic, legendary riffs. But this one has a little special flair because this really is the first time he puts in what I call the heavy metal gallop, that chunky riff, that the riff that has been emulated by so many. Many people have done this riff, but none better than Tony Iommi. So coming in our second nominee, Children of the Grave by Black Sabbath. Our third nominee, Fireball by Deep Purple, one of the other big 3 British bands. Now, I've been accused and guilty as charged of focusing a lot of my attention when it comes to instruments on the guitar. So maybe it's time to give a little love to the drummers out there. So here on the song Fireball from Deep Purple, we're going to recognize not Ritchie Blackmore, but the drummer, Ian Paice. I hope I'm saying your name right, Ian. He has one of the early examples of just savage double bass drumming on this song. Really fast-paced, breakneck speed, fantastic song, and it doesn't work without tremendous drumming on this song. In fact, in this entire album, you're going to see a lot of highlights of Ian Pace's work. So coming in at number 3, Fireball by Deep Purple. Our fourth nominee is from a band that I wasn't really familiar with until I started going back and looking through the catalog. And Flower Traveling Band may be the very first Japanese heavy metal band. Their song, Satori 2, is excellent. It is mesmerizing. It is ahead of its time, and it is technically brilliant. I love this song. I had never heard of Flower Traveling Band. I want to, and since then have been exploring a lot more of their music because it is sensational. If you've never heard the Flower Traveling Band, start here with Satori 2 and be amazed at the brilliance. And when you think about the fact that this was happening in 1971, how ahead of its time it was. Our fourth nominee, Flower Traveling Band, Satori 2. Our final nomination is the last of the big 3 bands. You know they were going to get in here somehow. Led Zeppelin with their epic Stairway to Heaven. Jimmy Page puts on a brilliant performance on this song. The song starts out very light and then slowly but surely gets heavier and heavier till it hits this peak crescendo. And at that point, Jimmy Page breaks into a beautiful guitar solo. One of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, one of the greatest songs of all time, right here. Our fifth nominee, Led Zeppelin with Stairway to Heaven. And the winner is Children of the Grave by Black Sabbath. Tony Iommi takes home the award, again for one of the most brilliant opening riffs in the history of heavy metal, and really being a pioneer in that crunchy, chuggy style of guitar work. This was a very tough competition. Brilliant guitars, cameo from a great drummer. This was really difficult, but at the end of the day, Tony Iommi and Black Sabbath take home the award. Now, the Grammys that year, interestingly enough, did the theme from Shaft, which is, I believe what they called them was black exploitation films. Isaac Hayes composed this. It's basically that soundtrack. Again, the Grammys seem to be off in left field here. When you look at the songs that we just talked about, the brilliance of the performances, I find it hard to believe that the theme from Shaft is going to level up to this. So not only are we giving Black Sabbath the award for Best Heavy Metal Hard Rock Instrument, but we're also going to give them the award for overall Best Instrument, because the stuff that's happening in heavy metal, the stuff that's happening in hard rock, while it's being ignored, is some legendary stuff that the Grammys are just missing. So, not only are we giving them Best Hard Rock and Heavy Metal, but once again, Best Instrumentation, Black Sabbath, Children of the Grave. Now let's move on to vocals. Here are the nominees for the Best Vocal Performance for Hard Rock and Heavy Metal. Our first nominee is Deep Purple with the song Fireball. We talked about how this is a very fast song, breakneck speed, double bass. We talked about the drumming on this album. Well, Ian Gillan has to keep up. You know, one of the things that's amazing to me about Ian Gillan is that in a very fast-paced song like this, it's very hard for the guitarist or the vocalist to keep the same level of power going throughout the entire song. Ian Gillan does it, and he makes it look easy. Clearly one of the most powerful voices in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. Knocking it out again on this one, our first nominee, Fireball by Deep Purple. Our second nominee is Jethro Tull with the song Cross-Eyed Mary. Now, for those of you who have followed the history of the Grammys, Jethro Tull has a very infamously bad reputation because of what happened a couple of decades later, where they were given a hard rock heavy metal award that they did not in any way, shape, or form deserve. But here in the 70s, we're catching Jethro Tull at their peak, their creative genius, and Ian Anderson has never sounded better. So in this case, Jethro Tull is more than deserving and gets the second nominee here, again for Jethro Tull, Cross-Eyed Mary. Our third nomination, not a big surprise, Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. One of my favorite tropes in music is that starting out really light, building up heavier and heavier. And while Jimmy Page is doing that on the guitar, while John Bonham's doing that on the drums, Robert Plant's doing that with his voice. We talked about Robert Plant last week and the intensity of Immigrant Song. This song starts out very light, but by the end of it, he brings back that type of intensity to this song as well. Brilliantly done. Robert Plant, one of the best vocalists in the history of rock. And if Immigrant Song isn't his trademark, this one has to be. So our third nomination, Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin. Our fourth nominee is Nazareth. Nazareth being one of the bands I really thought about for Best Newcomer of the Year. They have a song called Morning Dew. Now, why are they being nominated here? Because if you love gravel-throated rock singers, Dan McCaffrey is the top of the list. If you have ever listened to Nazareth, you'll know that he has such a unique, gravelly, strong voice. It does make you want to take a lozenge, but it is beautiful. This Scottish band performs Morning Dew. This is a cover song that has been covered by many bands, but it is one of the most beautiful songs ever written. Again, a little bit of a protest against nuclear holocaust. Morning Dew, Nazareth, you're our fourth nominee. And finally, our fifth and final nominee is The Who for Behind Blue Eyes. The Who is one of the most legendary bands in the history of hard rock, and this is, I think, the moment that The Who hits their absolute best. Roger Daltrey's voice has so much emotion. This song is so far above most of the songs that The Who do, and it is our nominee today. Behind Blue Eyes, Roger Daltrey and The Who. And the winner is Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. Many of these nominations are very close. This one's not that close. Robert Plant, absolutely killing it again. This is the third time that he has brought home the trophy for Best Vocal Performance. And again, this year, there's some very good singing performance, very good vocals, but there was never any doubt who was taking home the trophy. Now, I'm going to hold off on getting too much into the Grammys until the next category. But the vocalist of the year was James Taylor for a song called You've Got a Friend. Now, I want you to just hold that thought for a minute. First and foremost, I don't understand the attraction of James Taylor's voice. It's very thin, very nasally. When you listen to Robert Plant or Ian Gillan, what you hear is so much power and so much depth and so much range. James Taylor has a very thin, narrow range where he keeps his songs into. He's a fine singer, I suppose, but it's just not my style of singing. So not only am I going to give Robert Plant for the third time, Best Hard Rock Heavy Metal Vocal Performance, but I'm going to give him in the big category Best Vocal Performance as well, giving him 6 Grammys for Best Vocals over the last 3 years, and they're well deserved. You would be hard pressed to explain to someone why the Grammy Awards never gave Robert Plant an award when he is clearly, at this point in time, the greatest vocalist in rock. But I just want you to remember, because we're going to talk about this a little bit in our next category. The Grammys nominated James Taylor for You've Got a Friend. Keep that in mind. Let's go over to the Song of the Year. Now, throughout these first few episodes, we have seen these categories dominated by the big British 3. Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath. But we're going to start seeing American metal become more and more prominent as this list goes on. And along those lines, our first nominee, Alice Cooper, with the song I'm 18. This is the first major hit for Alice Cooper, and it's a song that really defines the angst of being a teenager in the 70s, or really of any time. Really good song by Alice Cooper. He's been around for a couple of years, but this is really Alice Cooper starting to find his rhythm, find his voice, and produce a number of fantastic hits. Here's the first one, I'm 18. And spoiler alert, our second nominee is also Alice Cooper from a different album that he put out that same year, the song Under My Wheels. Another great song, and really, again, showing the progressive, each album, Alice Cooper continues to get better at songwriting. This is a tremendous song. It still is heavy, but it's again, so catchy and so radio friendly. One of the things that I think people sometimes take umbrage with heavy metal is, well, it's too radio friendly or it's too catchy, but that's the point of really good hard rock heavy metal, is to not just be heavy and hard and all of the things we love about it, but to also be so catchy that it brings in a bigger audience. This is a fantastic example of that, where you see I'm 18, a big hit, followed up with Under My Wheels, which is, again, very catchy, following up, keeping that momentum. Alice Cooper is about to become one of the biggest acts in the world because he's got terrific songs that are not just heavy, but also friendly to the masses to come in and see what's going on over there. So again, our second nominee, Alice Cooper, Under My Wheels. But then back to the British Big 3. And again, the song we've talked about a lot, Black Sabbath, Children of the Grave. One of the landmarks, I guess, or one of the themes of heavy metal music in the 70s and 80s was the Cold War and the mutual assured destruction we just knew we were in for. This is a protest against nuclear war, and it's done so very well. As you can tell, I love this song. It is our third nominee, Children of the Grave, Black Sabbath. Our fourth nominee is from Jethro Tull again, and their signature song, Aqualung. From the opening riff to the very end, this is by far, to me, the best Jethro Tull song. It is one that has lived on for decades, and honestly, Ian Anderson and the boys have never sounded as good as they did right here in 1971. So again, our fourth nominee, Aqualung. Da 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 da. You can't get that riff out of your head. And finally, what a surprise! Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. This song, I've already gushed enough about it, so let's just get to the winner, shall we? Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Listen, this may be arguably the best hard rock song of all time. When I was growing up in the early 80s, this was at that time known as the greatest hard rock song of all time. It is when you think about Led Zeppelin and all the great songs they put out, this is the song they're most known for. It is a classic. It had to be the choice here. Now, Song of the Year by the Grammys was Carole King for a song called You've Got a Friend. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just nominate James Taylor for Vocal of the Year for a song called You've Got a Friend? Turns out it's the same damn song. So let me get this straight, Grammys, because this is bizarre to me. The year is 1971. Carole King writes a song called You've Got a Friend, puts it on an album. It's a great song. Super. James Taylor, in the very same year, sings the damn song and wins a Grammy for singing someone else's song that they put out not 3 years ago, not 5 years ago, the same year. The Grammys gave the award to James Taylor for singing Carole King's song and gave her the Grammy for Best Song. Does anybody else find this bizarre? Is this a joke? Like, what are the Grammys doing? And to top it all off, listen, I don't think either of this is a great song. It's no Stairway to Heaven, but it's a great song. I'll give them credit. But listening to both these songs back to back to kind of try to, because I was confused, like, wait a minute, is that the same song? And it was. If you ask my opinion, Carole King has a better voice than James Taylor, so I don't understand what the Grammys are doing. I don't understand how you can have two artists putting out the same song the same year and both getting Grammys in different categories. Throw them all out. Best Song of the Year, hard rock, heavy metal, Stairway to Heaven. Best Song of the Year, across the board, Stairway to Heaven. Let's just end this nonsense and give these great artists who are writing the most legendary songs in the history of music the credit they deserve. I'll get off my soapbox because we still have Album of the Year to come. Our first nominee is the Allman Brothers at Fillmore East. We touched upon this briefly earlier, but if this isn't the very first double live album, it's the most important double live album to date. This sets the standard for all double live albums going forward. And another really cool thing about this, when the Allman Brothers released this double live album, they only charged the customer as if it were a single album, a single disc album. Now, trust me, for someone growing up in the 70s, 80s, when you bought a double album, you paid extra for that. Very cool idea that they would put out 2 discs and charge people only for 1. And they took all of their great songs and made them better. These are the ultimate versions of these songs and are recognized as such. Therefore, they have to be our first nominee at Fillmore East by the Allman Brothers. One more thing. This is the last time we see both the Allman Brothers and Dickie Betts together. As you may or may not be aware, Duane Allman dies shortly thereafter in a tragic motorcycle accident. So not only are these the ultimate versions of these songs, they're the last time we get to see the Allman Brothers, their full original lineup together. Very sad. Our second nominee, Master of Reality by Black Sabbath. That's right, the defending champions are back for more. Of course, they won last year with the album Paranoid. You know, sometimes bands rest on their laurels, not Sabbath. They come back with an absolute monster of an album. Maybe my favorite Black Sabbath album right here. So the defending champions are not going quietly. Our third nominee, Jethro Tull, with their album Aqualung. Jethro Tull, of course, is more known in the progressive rock circles. But on this particular album, and I think the reason why it was such a big hit for them, is not only do they have all the progressive chops in there, but they also put in a lot of heaviness and a lot of grit. We talk about that opening riff for Aqualung being one of the all-time best. This whole album's good. Aqualung, Cross-Eyed Mary, Locomotive Breath. The list goes on and on. Jethro Tull might be controversial down the road, but right here, they're at their peak, and they deserve the nominee for Aqualung. Our fourth nominee, of course, Led Zeppelin, with Led Zeppelin 4. Or the Unknown album, or the Runes album. Listen, Led Zeppelin was a great band, but they were terrible at picking out album names. Led Zeppelin 4 is not just Stairway to Heaven, of course that is on there, but they also have Black Dog. They also have Rock and Roll. They also have Misty Mountain Hop. This, if we're to be honest about this, if you remember, Led Zeppelin won Album of the Year back in 1969. And quite frankly, their album in 1970, Led Zeppelin 3, was only okay in comparison. So Led Zeppelin 4, this is a bit of a comeback album for them. This is back to the standard that Led Zeppelin would have in their early years. So they took Black Sabbath's taking their title seriously, because they came back with an epic album to challenge to get their titles back. Led Zeppelin 4. And finally, one of the most legendary bands in the history of rock and roll is The Who. And by far, their best album comes in 1971 with the album Who's Next. I love this album. It is, when you talk about a band as good as The Who, and you talk about that this is by far their best album, you know it's really good. So, we talked about this in the opener. 5 of the greatest hard rock heavy metal bands of all time, arguably all putting out their very best albums this year. Ooh. And the winner is... and still defending champions, Black Sabbath, bring home the award again with Master of Reality. The second year in a row, they've brought home Album of the Year. Second year in a row, they're a double winner, Best Hard Rock Heavy Metal Performance. This is peak Black Sabbath in the Aussie years, and it is well deserved. Now, the Grammys that year picked, once again, Carole King with her album Tapestry. Carole King had a big influence in that era. But if you think about the influence Black Sabbath has had across now, what are we looking at? 5 decades later, I think that the choice is pretty obvious. This is a Hall of Fame level album, and it deserves not only Best Hard Rock and Heavy Metal Album of the Year, but Best Album of the Year across the line, period. Congratulations to Black Sabbath. And honestly, Led Zeppelin 4, if you think that is the superior album, and that is the album that should be winning all these awards, I wouldn't argue too vociferously about that, because if it was any other year, it would be walking away with all the awards. So at the end of the day, we still have Black Sabbath getting Grammys for Album of the Year, for Musical Performance of the Year, and Best Hard Rock Heavy Metal Performance of the Year. But Led Zeppelin has a pretty good consolation prize as they win Song of the Year and Vocal Performance of the Year. Kind of a little bit of a split, as you would expect when you have 2 titans of music clashing with 2 of their very best albums. Well, that wraps up this episode. Next week, of course, we will be exploring the year 1972. Join us live every Tuesday night, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Until then, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.